All right. We are live again. It's Friday afternoon, and I'm so excited for this particular Friday because I have an incredible guest today who I'm really, really excited to talk to. And he is an author, so I have, prepared myself to look at par. Dr. Harry Lamba. He is a Sierra Club activist, but he is also an energy ecosystem consultant, and his wealth and depth of knowledge, as I wrote on Facebook, is just impressive. And so excited. We had a conversation a couple days ago, like, right? Can I call you Harry? We actually didn't talk about that. Or do you want me to call you Dr. Lumber?
Hurry is fine. Hurry is fine.
Right, and we also actually share a little bit that we both immigrants. Harry came from India, not Russia, from India to study in United States. He got his Ph.D. in engineering in University of Illinois, and had a robust career. We talked about it, which I'm hoping to get into it. It's very exciting to meet people who are so in love with their career, and they really talk and learn in such an inspirational way like you do, Harry. So I really want to get into that. And then you came to California how many years ago? About
Or 3 years back?
2 years back. Wow, it's
Yeah.
very, yeah, very new. And you wrote several books. One of the latest books, I don't want to butcher the name, so I'm going to read it: Bright Climate Futures, a Global Energy, Climate, and Ecosystem Transformation. So that book was just published, right, by Regent Press in Berkeley. And we're going to definitely get into that book, also why it's so important to write books like that, and what we want to accomplish with that. Well, and you are also an activist within the Sierra Club. You're on the executive committee of the West Contra Costa Sierra Club group, and you are participating in California Energy Committee, which is very fitting, obviously. So without further ado, if I didn't cover some things, which we talked about it a lot to cover, then you can fill in, and maybe we'll have another conversation also. So I was curious about your journey naturally from India to United States. What prompted it? Was there an interest originally, or your parents sort of send you away to study? What is the impetus?
Yeah. I was a young Sikh boy with a turban and everything and a beard. And Sikhs are, as you know, a minority in India. But, anyways, I was always well treated very well. And I was in this high tech university engineering college called the Indian Institute of Technology at Kanpur, and which was American aided, by the way. And
Vaccinated?
it was aided by the United States.
Mhm.
Um, and it was quite high tech. I did a very interesting field, which was aeronautics, a lot about airplanes,
Mhm.
their aerodynamics, their structures, and everything. And we also had some very good visiting professors from the US. We had advanced technical equipment. But India was not ready for aeronautical engineers, so they did not too good a job with manpower planning, and
Yeah.
so there were no jobs available. And at that time, because we were such a good, at that time certainly, and even maybe now, sort of a world-class engineering college, um, there was a lot of and we had connections with the states. There was an automatic thing where maybe 20 to
Mhm.
25% of our class was going over to the States. And I tried unsuccessfully to land a job. I even tried unsuccessfully to start a business.
In
And
India.
feeling that, I asked my folks, buy me a ticket, I'll get admission. And so that's how I applied to several universities and then got into the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And so I basically then they bought me a ticket and gave me $1,000. That's all I had, and so I took the journey. I had very interesting journeys via Europe, stopped at Rome, Paris, Frankfurt on the way,
Nice.
um, and had very interesting night stopovers. But anyways, I was at the University of Illinois then to start my graduate studies in engineering mechanics. So
How
that's
did you stretch that $1,000? And which year was that when you were
that was
taking the job?
1970, and they raised the foreign tuition from $450 a semester to $750 a semester right there. Um, and so I thought I would have enough money for 2 semesters, but then I found out that the tuition had gone up and I would only have enough money if I took that plus living expenses,
Mhm.
enough money for just 1 semester.
Wow.
But I just started to put on my specs and I tried to look very intelligent and found out which professor had money and went and talked to him on the weekend. And luckily, I was, because of what we did at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, in terms of computers, computers was a new thing those days, you know. And anyway, he decided to give me a quarter time research assistantship, which meant tuition waiver. And I got that'd be $180 a month, which was a lot of money at that time. And he said, Lamba, why don't you come and meet me on Monday?
Mhm.
This was the weekend. So he said, come and meet me. And when I met him, as I was walking out, I again impressed him with all the things I had done and everything. And he says, there's another professor who needs a quarter-time teaching assistant. So why don't we give you that too? You'll have to learn a little bit about that and then teach it to undergraduate students. And here I
Wow.
was, so um,
Two jobs.
but half-time teaching is teaching plus research was about $350 plus no tuition, and
Yeah.
I got lucky.
You were living like a king, right?
Yeah, I was at 350 big bucks. I was living like a king. It was I had money difficulty spending one-third of that,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and was able to buy a new car within about a year or so, and so
Living
that,
the American dream, right?
yeah. So there was, I got to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, a beautiful campus, very nice university, 150 miles south of Chicago, and just basically started my graduate studies in engineering mechanics, which is a combination of materials and mechanical engineering. So
Mhm.
that's how I got my story of why I came to the US.
It says, well, there's another story in it. How did you? I was asking, how did you stretch the $1,000 in Europe while traveling to United States? But that's for another conversation. Probably
Yeah,
it's probably not very $1,000 now. Probably not going to go very far
yeah, yeah.
anywhere. But well, also you did a lot of work in engineering, and you 40 plus years. So um, and we might jump a little bit around, but how did the sustainability, energy, environmental protection sort of came into play? Was it during your engineering life? Was it when sort of your grandkids came along, or when did you start thinking about the environment?
Well, actually, my thinking kind of started back in India in the sense that I was seeing all these high tech things. I mean, high technology, industrialization, use of fossil fuels, um, and I was seeing. I was quite impressed, and of course, I enjoyed the engineering part of it. But then
Mm-hmm.
I could see that it wasn't really benefiting the common man. In many cases, was hurting the common man in India.
Mm-hmm.
They were getting resources taken away from them, using the wrong kinds of agriculture that were environmentally damaging, and things like that. So I started thinking in my mind. But anyway, I was here for about 6 to 7 years in engineering college at University of Illinois. Enjoyed that, did very well. Even got a private pilot license at the Institute of Aviation. So I had a good time, and then I applied for my green card and got a job in a company up in Chicago, and I worked for many years. I was always thinking about how can countries like India develop in the right way. And I was quite frustrated in the sense that I didn't see any way um, of
Leapfrogging. Yeah.
that this could happen, because everything seemed so deterministic. It was like modern civilization had set it up in this way, and it was only this way that it could be done. It had to be have with these large factories and which employed very few people and so forth. And then I ran into this book, Small is Beautiful. Um, it says economics as if people mattered. It was Schumacher's book.
Yeah, Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. So because we're doing actually now podcast also, so people cannot look. I have to remind myself that I need to
Yeah.
speak out loud.
But when I read this book, I said, wow, it hit me. It says, because Schumacher basically was questioning everything.
Mm-hmm.
He was questioning the economics, he was questioning the industrialization, he was questioning the environment, he was questioning the ownership aspects.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would refer to Gandhi. And, so what really struck me at that time was,
Mm-hmm.
wow, it opened my mind to alternate ways of thinking. Until then, I was kind of thinking in the groove of what modern civilized, quote unquote, modern civilization had handed me. And then all of a sudden I was like, I can think different ways. I have to think it out and see what the criteria are, see if there's genuine benefits, and then see if something makes sense. And so that's what that book. And I actually went back and read a lot of Gandhi's books. And there's not much known about Gandhi, but Gandhi actually talked about a lot of development aspects, industrial development the right way, politics, participatory democracy the right way, social affairs like respecting diversity of every kind the right way. So anyway, it was very educational, and I was involved in thinking about South Asia and India all the way from about since when I graduated from about 1980 to about 1990. And I was thinking about all the different ways in which I became convinced that countries like India are much better off if they progress from within. Because if you have imported industrialization and you have to borrow things and you have to be indebted, you could, it was I began to understand reading Schumacher, and then some of the books that he referred to, I read further, and I started realizing that there were different ways of doing things, which could benefit common people a lot more than, So, but anyway, it was when I got into sustainability was, so I was actually in South Asia Affairs. I was the president of the India Development Service, which is an organization that was supporting rural development efforts in India. So I was there for a couple of years, 88 through 90. And then all of a sudden in 91, the Earth Summit came up. And this was a United Nations conference on environment and development that a very strong Canadian by the name of Maurice Strong, a very inspiring leader, had organized for Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And so I found it very interesting. All of a sudden, there were all these global environmental and developmental issues and so forth. And so I organized a group, co-founded a group called the Earth Summit Network in Chicago. And we were trying to educate the Chicago and the Illinois public on the Earth Summit issues, having to do with climate change, biodiversity, forests, and all the developmental aspects that you could think of, poverty, water quality, and so on. I was going around. The very first video conference I organized at DePaul University featured Senator Al Gore as a young senator.
Wow. So you met him in person?
We never met him in person. He was on teleconference.
In teleconference. Oh, so you've done it before many times. You're prepared for the pandemic.
But that's true. We held many teleconferences, but we held public events too at that time. I was going around giving talks on global warming, and I realized that I didn't know what I was talking about. But I was educating myself, and we tried to put pressure on the senior Bush administration to be more flexible at the talks in Rio and to sign the global warming treaty. I don't know whether it was because of our pressure or not, but he did sign the treaty. But that started, I
Nice
said,
thought, right?
yeah. All of a sudden I woke up and said, my gosh, there's all this global environment. India and South Asia and so forth don't exist in a vacuum. There's all this global aspects to things. It's not just the United States, although many Americans would like to think that the border stops at the north and the south. But but the thing is that we it's a globe, and it's a global environment. And so I began a process. After that, it was very good. We had organized about a couple of dozen. We had about 20 to 30 people, and in our group. And anyways, it started a process of reading and writing, which went on for a decade. And I followed everything like the Kyoto Protocol and so forth, which was change, different, development of the treaty. The protocol is where you actually do something, and the treaty is just a set of aspirations. And anyways, that resulted, I educated myself just about everything. So I became familiar with the environmental crisis, the ecological crisis, which is much bigger than climate change. It includes ozone layer, radioactive waste, hazardous waste.
I'm glad you mentioning that, because we were talking that it's sort of overlooked area, but I think it's so important because everything is interconnected in the environment. But yes, can I interrupt you for just 1 second? I'm curious because you mentioned, I mean, you wrote more than one book. How did it start? Did you take notes along the way and then you compile them? Because I was sharing that I have an aspiration to write a book one day at least.
So when I was an engineer, I used to travel quite a bit for business, for work. So I basically used to read and write on the planes. And then when I used to get to location, because I was away from the family, I had time at the hotel. So at nights I would again be reading and writing. And so I started writing my first book. Actually, I had written a couple of books before, which I didn't publish, having to do with developing countries. But anyway, I started reading and writing, starting with the environmental aspect, developmental aspects, how rich nations had become rich and how poor nations had become poorer, and so forth, and the economic and the debt crisis, and so forth. And so I studied all of that, and then I sat back and said, I put on Schumacher's thinking hat and Gandhi's thinking hat, and I said, how do we overcome all this, And so the second part, so I wrote a book basically, which was called Rethinking Progress Towards a Creative Transformation of Global Society. And that book, the second half of it is all about solving the ecological crisis, the developmental crisis, questioning economic principles, how we measure economic progress, like GDP is not a very good way of measuring progress. How do we redefine economic principles? Why do we need different kinds of democracy? There needs to be a quality. What is the quality of democracy? Quality of democracy means the democracy has to have width, depth, and range. And so I understood what democracy is all about, and what is a good quality democracy and what is a bad quality democracy.
Can you elaborate a little bit on, because I've never, maybe, just because I have books behind me doesn't mean I read everything, but can you elaborate a little bit on what do you mean by depth, width, and range?
So width is democracy is the extent to which the population participates in the political process. Voting is just one of them. But how do they participate? Do they participate in the conversations? Do they participate in that's the width. The depth is the extent to which their participation is, um, in a sense, meaningful. Is it
Mhm.
participatory? Do they really get to talk to the influential politicians? Do they get to influence it? Do they get to learn from this? And to what extent are they empowered to do some things locally? So that's
Mhm.
depth. And then range is, to what extent can they directly influence politics? Like referendums is a direct way. A
Mhm.
referendum is a symptom of range. So a referendum is where the population votes. So you have ballot measures and those kinds of things, which there's a lot of in California. And
Mhm.
so so those are the three aspects. But
Mhm.
the depth has to do a lot with how participatory the democracy is. Does
Mhm.
the elector get elected and then basically disregard, and that's the end of it? The constituents don't have any influence thereafter, or do the constituents get to participate? The best thing would be things like citizens committees that constantly the elected official has to turn to in order to um, to talk to them, and
Mhm.
you know
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
at a local level, participatory means not just having five councilmen rule, but
Yeah.
you have many elected citizens committees that affect,
Policy.
and they are not just appointed by the councilman,
Mhm.
some of them maybe, but they are elected also, and therefore there's a lot more participatory democracy. This really helped the Chipko Andolan in the Himalayan hills of India, where they
Mhm.
practiced Gandhian style democracy. They had women, they had this area of the Himalayas that was devastated by after the 62 war with China, they built a road through there, and
Mhm.
logging contractors and mining contractors and all that devastated that area. And these they formed these local self-participatory democracies in the hills, and uh, one gentleman who got a particular award showed us before and after how, when these folks started to take control of
Mhm.
hills and the resources and could plant trees and fruit trees and agricultural, the how that really transformed the landscape from a devastation to a green paradise, and all through participatory democracy. So I firmly believe that participatory democracy is the way that millions, billions of people can actually take care of their local land. Um,
Yeah. I
and
agree, actually. You know what? I think that it's one of those things that I'm also reminding myself of, that when people participate, they feel ownership of something.
yeah,
So much more likely, I think it's just simple psychology. If I'm participating in something, in creation of something, I have buy-in, and much more likely to follow what we develop together. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Of course, the people need to want to serve, and I think it's also actually talking about the breadth of it's an opportunity to involve more people in the governance. So a lot of cities are doing, budgetary participatory budgeting, and many other commissions. So I think it's important though to we touched a little bit in a different conversation that um, reiterate the values, because right now also I see um, so much polarization on both sides, and I think that doesn't help. So I think people need to think about the values: kindness, inclusion, diversity, etc. What are we bringing into the space, regardless? And of course, power on all levels, has the opportunity to empower in a good way or corrupt. So I think there's a lot of sort of work that, internal work that we need to do.
yeah, you're
But anyway, yeah, yeah,
right.
are you serving? You serve on any commissions yourself, or
Pardon?
did you serve on any commissions, on citizens commissions yourself, or not
Um,
yet?
Not really. I've done some participation out here in San Francisco,
Mhm.
but I was used to attend the Environmental Commission meetings. Uh,
Mhm.
but in Downers Grove, where I lived in the Chicago area, I used to attend their meetings. But you had to be appointed by a councilor. You
Yeah.
couldn't be elected. So you had to be in the good um, in a good relationship with a council person, and he was happy with you, and then he'd appoint you. That's how it
Yeah.
worked.
That's kind of counterproductive, right?
But anyway, so I completed the publication of my book in 2005. I couldn't find a publisher in the US who would take it up. So found a, because I used to visit India once in a while, I found a publisher in Delhi that did a good job of publishing it. And it made it difficult to promote the book in the US. But anyway, that book that way got published, both, and so that's what happened at that particular point of time. And after that, I was still working. And so I transitioned into talking about climate change, uh,
Mhm.
you know, and educating myself a lot about that. Um, uh, so that I think is what I started doing after I published my first, book in 2005. Um, and uh, the book actually, all the sections of a book has the subtitle of the book is Towards a Creative Transformation of Global Society. We have to rethink progress. So, what is
Mhm.
progress about? We have to think that. We have to think of types of progress that are beneficial. We have to think of types of progress that are beneficial for us, for the for other species, and for the planet. Chapter 2 of that book is actually a very interesting one. It's the biography of the planet. It takes you from 4.6 billion years, and when we were a molten ball for about 800 billion years, and
Mhm.
and and then how life developed. There was no oxygen. It was,
Mhm.
how did oxygen develop through photosynthesis?
Yeah.
You know, um,
I
and
know. I studied that all in Russia a long time ago. I probably have to revisit it. I was like, it's interesting when you're learning something early on, it sort of sits there, and I think that I need to remind myself for sure. And it's, I think that one thing that you're bringing up really that, I come back again and again, this critical thinking and thinking, I heard this phrase recently, think that not outside of the box, but think like there is no box. And I think that's what you're referring to. And I think that um, definitely, it's interesting. I was thinking that in Russia, even though we had such a totalitarian system, the critical thinking was ingrained in us. Sort of questioning and analyzing, etc. It's an interesting dichotomy, but I think it's so crucial because when people are just living within the system without asking questions, why am I buying this? Why am I doing this way? There's no room for development and really for coming to truth. And truth ultimately is that we are the environment. We are not separate. I mean, we want to think that we are, but we're coming from nowhere and we're becoming dust. So, anyway, a little
yeah,
philosophical.
but I mean, that's how I start the second part of my book. Actually,
Uh-huh.
um, is two things. One is we think of the environment as something that's out there. It
Mm-hmm.
actually is not out there. Our external environment, everything outside our skin is our external environment. Everything inside our skin is our internal environment. And the two environments interact. So
Mm-hmm.
this whole dichotomy of the environment and nature being out there is ridiculous. I mean, the virus has shown us that the viruses exist in us and everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and we are all connected, and so that's the first part. The second part is, we are a species. We are a mammal species. We are a very intelligent species, but we are a mammal species with all of the characteristics of mammals. you
Mm-hmm.
know we have the extremities, etc., etc. We give birth to a young a certain way,
Mhm.
and so forth. And so we have to understand that when we talk of nature, it's not that we are nature, and we are the rest of nature is out there. And so we have to be good to the rest of nature, and to the planet, because the
Yeah.
biosphere and the hydrosphere and all these spheres, geospheres, are what create good conditions for life on this planet. We're very lucky to have planet Earth, which is just the right distance from the sun and has big enough to be able to hold
The
an
magic.
atmosphere. Is If we were closer like Venus, we would have gotten super hot. All the
Mhm.
water would have boiled off on Venus, and we have the runaway greenhouse effect.
Yeah.
And we are so lucky. And the planet has buried fossil fuels, taken carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and buried it in fossil fuels, cooled the planet for us.
Mhm.
And here, what do? What happened over hundreds of millions of years in fossil fuels, in 2 or 3 centuries, we take it and we start pumping it up into the atmosphere, in a dig, burn, and dump cycle that basically is reversing all the beautiful conditions that the planet developed for us.
Yeah.
So that's
Well, and
kind of.
I mentioned to you that something, the area that I feel, maybe other people are talking about, but I feel very passionate about, and also I feel like it's overlooked a little bit in conversations, is whole biodiversity, biosystems, which is incredibly important in not only because I love the beauty, I love the diversity, I love the wonder of it, the creativity, and it's like it's amazing when you watch the planet Earth, or mind blowing, but also because all of those ecosystems developed for a certain reason. I remember at Presidia, and I um, unfortunately will not be able to name the name of the species, but there's a lizard. Why there's no outbreaks of Lyme disease, for example, or haven't been, for many years in like Marin County, because apparently there's a lizard that um, that neutralizes the virus, right? Is it? No, it's not a virus. It's anyway. I'm a veterinarian. I should know that. I was like, but anyway, the Lyme disease is getting neutralized. So things like that, when we learn about nature and how it interacts, it's just absolutely amazing. We're just tapping into those things, developing and researching, and we're killing it at the same time. And that to me is just absolutely stupid.
Yeah, yeah. Just like, I mean, biodiversity, the diversity, cultural diversity in nations is the strength. When you have respect for cultural diversity within nations, it actually is strong because everybody feels they belong, everybody is loyal, and everybody works for the benefit of the nation. Um, Biodiversity is a similar thing for the planet and for us in terms of life in general, because biodiversity is something that works for us and works with us, and in every way, our health is dependent on it. The health of ecosystems is dependent on it.
Mhm.
So the massive extinction of the species, that's part of, we are living through the sixth most massive extinction of the species right now, and this one, it's caused by us
Yep.
humans, and it needs to begin to be reversed. There was a treaty on biodiversity at Rio, but precious little has happened as for climate change, over the
Yep.
last 30 years. So
So I
biodiversity.
I want to get, because you do have that book, which we talked about, Paul Hawkins' book, the drawdown, that it provides sort of a menu of options with uh, what kind of effects they're going to have on the climate change, or drawing down carbon, or preventing carbon from being released, or other greenhouse gases. And we talked that we didn't really have necessarily, or what you were interested in doing is developing a plan, that addresses different areas. So I want to hear what is your how did you come with the plan? And maybe you can talk a little bit about the major aspect of that plan.
Yeah. The Just a little bit of background. For about 10 years since after I wrote my book, all the way from 2006 to 2016, I was used to give. I worked with a small nonprofit group in Chicago, um, having to do with India, but it actually organized panels on climate change. And so I used to organize a panel for Earth Day and also for the annual conference in October, where I used to give a talk on climate, problems and solutions. And what happened was that I was learning about solutions. During that time, the American Solar Energy Society and Greenpeace came up with some options, some plans that they were proposing called the 60-20-20 plan, which is 60% energy efficiency, 20% renewables, 20% biofuels. And so anyway, I would talk about problems, I would talk about solutions. So I was educating myself quite a bit. And then they said, why don't you make it fun? So I came out with a book called History of our Planet Earth, Poetry plus Watercolors, which explain, this whole dynamic that was taking place in terms of, greenhouse gases and the planet and so forth. And
How is it called, the book?
it is called the history of our Earth and our role in its future. And it had watercolors from that my brother in India had made, and then my
Nice.
on one side. And anyway, sort of the fun
I
thing.
recommend to those people who are listening to us and cannot see, the watercolors are great. So I highly recommend getting the book. And I'm glad you're mentioning, because I wanted to talk about poetry, but let's get back to that, because that's unusual. Also, you're an engineer working in aeronautics and trains. We didn't even touch on that yet. You work on trains and train technology, and then poetry. So I'm also, I love that you're combining those left and right brain
So, I mean, that was the book was like Rethinking Progress was the way to the head, and poetry was the way to the heart. So is music and art and all these things. So, anyways, then I also,
maybe you can read some poem for us too. I didn't even think about it, but maybe you can read a poem for us if you would, if you feel
I'll
comfortable.
get to it. I'll do it later, maybe towards the end.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I also wrote a personal climate change handbook in 2016 because they said, give us something specific. And so that covered the Paris Agreement and so forth. But then when I came to California, I started thinking through all of this, and I said, um, it's doable. We can really solve climate change and come out ahead. When I spoke to a particular group in El Cerrito in California, I realized that we could do it. So then I started writing the book, and basically, I said, everybody, they've been saying, it's a all question of cutting back and, doing with less fossil fuels and, so forth and all. And if you look at the current situation, Olga, we are 80% dependent on fossil fuels right now. Our civilization is totally dependent on fossil fuels. From 1992 to now, if we had reduced our emissions just by 1% a year, we would be far ahead of the game. And the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would be much lower, and we could actually use some fossil fuels. But now we are in a situation there where the IPCC pointed out, and I was following their assessment reports all the way from the first one in 1990 to the fifth one, recent one, and their 1.5C report recent. And basically, they said that we run out of time. And we have.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you say who, because I want people who are not necessarily in this movement to also understand who and what we're talking about. So If you can say the without abbreviation, that would be great.
Yeah, that was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is a United Nations organization set up for monitoring it. And they are the ones that were advising the world and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was the organization set up when the treaty was signed, and they're headquartered in Bonn, Germany. And IPCC really is the most credible source, regardless of what climate deniers say. They are the most credible source because it involves thousands and hundreds of scientists. And they told us that in order to restrict the global temperature rise to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have to do certain things with carbon emissions and with methane and nitrous oxide emissions by the year 2050. So I took that up as a global plan, and I took that up as a goal, and I said, okay, how can we meet that? And so basically what I did was, and the other thing was, we had to have plenty of energy. So all this thing about gloom and doom and thing I began to feel it was not correct. And so I came up with a global energy and emissions plan in order to keep the global temperature rise less than 1.5 Celsius. And what this involved was, it said, here's one particular fact before I get to that. I took the 2017 total world's energy consumption, which is reported by the International Energy Agency. And I took that energy and I calculated, I knew, because I was involved in solar energy and renewable energy from a technical and a business viewpoint, I could make the calculations. You know, as an engineer, that's the advantage. I can make the calculation. So I calculated from a utility scale system how much land area they needed. And the calculation showed that on less than 1% of the world's land area, you can produce all of the world's energy. So the question is that we can have plenty of energy. The question is really, how do you store it for use when the sun is not shining? So the storage issue is the issue that needs to be technically think. So what my plan basically said is we can have plenty of renewable energy for our expanding needs. And so I came up with a specific plan for that. We can replace fossil fuels with renewable energy. And if we electrify just about everything that we can then power that with renewable energy. And so we would have to expand our electrical system quite a bit for that. But we could store renewable energy in batteries, and battery systems are becoming better and better. And California is starting to use large-scale battery systems, both to, a peaker natural gas plant at Puente in Southern California is going to be replaced with a battery system, and it could be supplemented with a solar system. So basically what I'm saying is, and then you can store renewable energy in hydrogen and ammonia. These are non-carbon, energy-dense, transportable fuels, which the world already uses in large quantities. We use 170 million metric tons of hydrogen and 70 million metric tons of ammonia, mostly in agriculture. So we know how to use these fuels. The main thing is we don't make them from natural gas or coal, we make them from renewable energy. And by taking water, which is hydrogen oxide, and splitting it up into hydrogen and oxygen. And we just
and I think that correct me, you know more, so I'll ask it as a question. I think it seems like that would be also because battery production is not necessarily very sustainable right now, also because we use precious metals, lithium. So it seems to me that this energy storage will be also more sustainable and less resource intensive than what we have now. Is that correct in your?
And so you can so I'm talking about replacing, let's say, for example, a coal-fired power plant with solar system plus a large battery system. The battery system would be instantaneous. So clouds come over, battery system would smooth things out. You could use batteries for a few hours evening, and then you would be with an excess, I call it a hump curve. You would have excess solar energy that would be generating hydrogen through the day, and that hydrogen at night would generate the electricity. Or if you generate surplus hydrogen you could supply it to other locations, just like you supply, gasoline and diesel right now. And so I'm proposing these kinds of power plants, and then I'm proposing solar electric hydrogen highways. So you would take a highway, and I have concepts in my book about this. So you basically be like a rest area where you would have a solar system and a battery system and a production unit for hydrogen or a supply from outside. And so cars would pull up and they would get charged and directly by solar energy. And there's actually a system like that out in San Rafael that MCE or Marin Clean Energy has developed. And you could then basically take a whole US transportation, road transportation system and replace 110,000 gas stations with 110,000 solar electric hydrogen stations. And they'd be clean, and so that's what I'm proposing for that. And then I've come up with, climate change is a global issue. So I've come up with plans for the global level, for a detailed plan for the US, for California, for China, India, and the European Union. So there's detailed plans, energy.
Russia? Hold on, where's Russia?
So there's detailed energy, climate, and ecosystem plans for all of these nations, and because you have to deal with it globally, and so my overall plan is saying this energy issue, a massive expansion of carbon sinks, forests, coastal ecosystems, and agriculture, start absorbing some carbon and use it in the latter part of the century when you've gotten to zero carbon emissions and you've mostly eliminated fossil fuels. You then use your carbon sinks to get your carbon dioxide in the atmosphere down lower so that the earth further cools down, and then you still need to cope with 1.5 degrees Celsius. So you need disaster risk reduction for worsening natural disasters. We need to be spending globally every day preparing year round now for example, wildfires, whether it's in Western US or Australia or Siberia. We need to be spending every day preparing for worsening hurricanes and tornadoes. So then we need a jobs economy, a just transition, energy democracy, and a reindustrialization strategy so that would benefit everybody. This is a tremendous opportunity. In politics, you have people talking about green manufacturing and all that, or just recovering from COVID-19. This is much more than a green recovery. It is a 30-year plan of how we can transform our whole global economy to a clean economy, and with the ecosystems transformed, make the first step towards restoring biodiversity, and we have to have, I know there is a lot of adverseness, especially among a certain political circle in the US against the United Nations and that sort of thing, but we have to have a strengthened United Nations or a global organization that basically organizes, plans, coordinates, and implements this whole process from now till 2050. We have to have it. And the national leaderships have to not only think outside the box, but have to come up with this strengthened organization in order to make this happen. So this is kind of, in a sense, the 5 parts of my book that I've come up with that I think will, in a comprehensive fashion, and that's what makes it different from Drawdown. Drawdown is an excellent book. It's an excellent reference book. It gives you different options or a menu of options, but this is A to Z. Who's going to do what, how, when, and where, and how are we going to fund it? How are we going to implement it? What stages will it take? They don't even mention fossil fuels. You've got to have a plan for replacing fossil fuels, whether it's for electric power generation or use in industry or heating your homes. You have to have a plan, and so that's what I've come up with is, the only R&D really needed is in electrification and in producing green hydrogen and ammonia and in engines that use these fuels. So that's kind of, in a sense.
I have a couple questions because something obviously I'm drawing from my experience. So plan is good as its implementation. So how do you see, because a lot of people arguably, why do we have still fossil fuels, even though we had technologies for so many years that we could rely on renewable energy technologies. Obviously, a lot of people are benefiting greatly, billions of dollars, trillions of dollars are made in fossil fuel industries still. And those interests are lobbying very hard politicians and decision makers all over the planet to continue, and not really making plans to transition. So I guess my question, practically speaking, how do we convince people in power right now, and quite frankly fossil fuels companies who are benefiting from those fuels, to change? Because that to me is a crucial question. It's not that we didn't have technologies, we need to have buy-in and a will on behalf of decision makers. So did you, because we talked a little bit about it, so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, Olga, you have hit it on the nail on the head. Um, it's I have a whole chapter in my book on that.
Mm,
Um, and basically, it's the process, a big problem, and it's the process of climate denial. And for many years, the fossil fuel industry and the Koch brothers have funded. I call it, it's called the Tobacco Institute approach. The
oh yeah.
Tobacco Institute approach.
Right.
The Tobacco Institute approach basically said was that you try and persuade the American public by all means possible that tobacco is not bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just benign. It's just a little bit of smoke. So what? You have indoor pollutants too. And so there was you generate a systematic way. You create scientific information that confuses the public. You generate articles that confuse the public. You tell them that it's bad for business. It's and so forth. And the tobacco farmers are going to be hurt, etc., etc., etc. And so I've come up with this chapter that basically takes up all the false arguments. The Koch brothers invested more than $100 million in funding these organizations, which are these climate denier organizations, that systematically turn out, this misinformation. And they're the ones who started calling, climate change a hoax. Our leadership just picked those words up recently, but they've been doing it for the last 20, 30 years. And so they've funded these organizations systematically. So if you see an article come out tomorrow, it most probably comes and it talks and confuses you and all that. It most probably comes from one of these organizations. The fossil fuel industry is spending $200 million a year, directly or indirectly, trying to defeat initiatives throughout America.
Yep.
Throughout America. Out of the last election, the 7 initiatives that were pro-climate change, only 1 in California passed and 6 got defeated. Yep. So there is definitely a battle. Us as a fossil fuel civilization, they're willing to go to war to protect the oil, they're willing to, so forth. So each of these false arguments, besides saying how they use the Tobacco Institute approach for tobacco, how they use the Tobacco Institute approach when it came to trying to protect the ozone layer, and how now they're using the Tobacco Institute approach for climate change, I come out with all the false arguments and I refute them. Mm-hmm. Then the latest one that came out was this great documentary called Planet of the Humans. Mm-hmm. And it was mind-boggling. The amount of documentary, it's just a crappy documentary. Mm-hmm. And it's just full of the same kind of stuff. They don't even talk about the bad things about fossil fuels, and so I have a page and a half. I said, I got to refute this. So I'm really definitely, what we have to do is we have to overcome this, and we have to convince them, that this whole process is actually needs to happen. And so business wise, they had better get with it. So there's, in my process, a just transition. How do you take care of fossil fuel workers, help fossil fuel companies transition, have fossil fuel countries like OPEC, Saudi Arabia, transition from this tremendous amount of fossil fuel export, and Australia and Indonesia exporting coal. All of that has to stop, but then they have to transition to something. So the just transition needs to take care of that, besides overcoming them. And then that would take care of the fact that the workers in these fossil fuel industries won't be politically opposing you, and that'll help, the political process. This whole process, you need to convince the common population. Besides doing all this, you need to convince the common population that you can have this reindustrialization, jobs and economy process, and take it by stages. Do some taxes and government investments to improve these demonstrations. Have some of these solar electric charging stations. Start increasing the incentives for adopting green technologies and these alternate technologies, while disincentives for fossil fuels. And then, because you can't do this, do this transition from 80% fossil fuels now to 5 or 6% by the year 2050, which is what you need to do. You have to do it in stages. And so in my final...
Of course, we are running out of time for all of those stages, but you know what strikes me that, and what I like about your approach also, that you're combining those sort of heart and mind approach, because I think environmental movement in general just tries to hit people at the head. And the law of marketing and law of it's psychology. We have to appeal to the heart. We have to appeal to people's, emotions. And I think that's why it's so important to bring into those conversations not only facts and figures, which you're doing, but also poetry, art, spoken word, talk about fears and concerns. And that's why I think that people, when we're talking about environmental movement versus, environmental justice movement, it's like, it's one and the same, because if people have fears and concerns and emotions, we need to address those before they can think about their influence in the world and how they're buying, what they're buying, how they're living, what they're driving. So I think it's important part that you are doing, combining those two. We have only a couple minutes left, unfortunately. I want to make sure that you tell people where to find the book, because I think that there are probably going to be a lot of questions, because there's such a huge topics, each of them. And I think that people might be interested, like Chris Peoples, we talked about Arthur Funstein, who's working on the on the bay, and of course Chris Peoples is working on transportation. So all people in the Sierra Club who are involved, and other people also. So where do we find the book? And is it online? Is it just in printed version?
It's actually going to hit print in about a week. You can order it from the Regent Press. You can order it from Amazon. You'll also be able to order it from any bookstore. The title of the book will be Brighter Climate Futures, Global Energy, Climate and Ecosystem Transformation by Dr. Hari Lamba. That's the part we have to solve climate change, Olga, within this 30 years, because everything otherwise that we know of, that you and I struggle with, are going to become more difficult. And we need to do that. And what I'm looking for is, I support your local efforts, and you support, say that, hey, there's this guy Lamba, crazy guy, who has to accept the plan that he's come up with, because that's the kind of plan we need in order to, hey, national leadership, please, take up this plan or something like it. And here's the ingredients, accept it, and come up with an international agreements and implement it. And so the whole website and the whole process that I'm going to be engaging in is going to be basically there. So please order, read the book, get educated, and then this will be an ongoing process. I'm basically here to stand in place until I can get this thing, this transformation accepted and implemented, so that 10 uh, years from now, I can look my grandson in the face and he'd say, "Grandpa, you knew something, you knew what to do. Why didn't you do it?" And so here's my thing, saying, I tried my best, but this time around, just trying the best is not good enough. We got to succeed. And so please,
Thank
let's
you.
do it.
So Amazon, you have a website also?
Yeah, the website is Brighter Climate Futures. In fact, if you Google Brighter Climate Futures, you'll see it all. You'll see the website, you'll see the Facebook page. I'll be uh, publishing, putting on a whole bunch of videos, from short 3-minute ones to 10-minute to ones that will be there, which will provide summaries. And then all of my chapters, I'm going to make them available in summary form and in video form, both on the website and on YouTube. So it's going to be there everywhere, and available to you. And there'll be a lot of freebies on the website, and we can use. I'd like to form teams and learn from people. If there are experts out there, I'd like to form teams so that we can all work together to implement some of these things. Because I'm continuously learning too. I'm not
And
the.
I think you're right. I think that some of the things will be augmented probably, and that it's a good discussion and implementation. And obviously, we do have in our leadership and our, and I'm talking about the Sierra Club, but also we live in Bay Area. There's so many people who are connected to politicians, to decision makers, that we need to communicate that. Thank you so much. We
Thank
can go,
you.
I think, for another day of conversations, but appreciate you making the time, and thank you so much for all your work. You're absolutely right. We need to implement. And I'm looking forward to looking at the website and reading the book and promoting, helping you to promote the book.
Thank you
Thank you
for
so
your
much.
inspiring leadership.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And please join us next Friday again. I'm going to have another amazing person, and another interesting conversation, hopefully, and where you learn and learn some things to apply in your own life. Thank you. And Dr. Lumber and I are going to stay for a second, but I'll see you all next Friday. Thank you.